I am delighted to be joined once again by Anna. Anna from Ukraine. Actually, she doesn't need a huge introduction. Everybody knows. And I think by now, and her videos, not only helping to explain why Ukrainians are so resilient, but also helping to explain Russian propaganda, helping to explain why Russia behaves in this way. I mean, there's plenty of material on there. Plenty of our discussions have dived into that as well. Let's start. Well, first, let's start to everyone who supports your channel, everyone who supports mine through Patreon, buy me a coffee, all these kind of things. They are incredibly important to help keep the work going that we're doing. But, well, we'll dive into the first question in a minute. Anna, it's great to see you again.
Thank you so much. I feel home on your channel, and I was also very happy to see you in real life in Ukraine. And I want to start this video with a funny story so that your community and my community knows that I started speaking to Jonathan in Ukrainian subconsciously. I did not plan, and I realized after a couple of sentences that I'm actually talking to Jonathan in Ukrainian, which means Jonathan is already Ukrainian in my mental folders. So thank you so much for coming and for doing all the amazing job, and to all the people who support us and make this possible.
I take that as a great compliment, of course, as I did when you started speaking to me. And the fact you didn't notice was hilarious. Also, ironically, I kind of understood what you were saying as well. So that was also kind of nice.
Thank
Um,
you. We can repeat anytime.
yes. We'll slip into Ukrainian, yes, in this video, and yeah, the channel sets out to stick with it. Let's talk a little bit about the Lviv Media Forum because there were some fantastic speakers there. Ones including Valery Pekar, who people will have just seen the video go up. And many others are still to come. You know, fantastic little conversations that took place in between the sessions there. What was your impression overall, though? Not just in the sort of quality of speakers, but the kind of things you heard, the insights. You know, let's go through our positives and negatives that we got out of that event.
No, well, in general, I think that the event is extremely important, and maybe even all involved do not realize how much. Because living in Ukraine, we have adapted, but I am very grateful that lots of people from different corners of the world came to Lviv, including you, to spend these days talking about very important things. And I loved the slogan that they have to speak, to say the unspoken. That is the problem of our years, of our decades, that people often are more worried, more afraid to name the words by their real names than actually the things that they describe. And it was about resilience, but not talks about the resilience. Many of these meetings, they took place in bomb shelters. And I do remember how Anne Applebaum said that that was one of the most glamorous bomb shelters she visited. And it's funny, it's cute, but it is extremely meaningful that under constant dangers from Russia, because Lviv, being far away from the front lines, is not safe too. And there are lots of people who were targeted there, lots of people who lost their lives that close to the borders of the European Union, that close to the borders of NATO, just for being Ukrainians or for being with Ukraine, because there are lots of people who are from different countries who support, who stand for us, and who give their lives in this fight, either as soldiers, as journalists. So I was very honored to be with such brave people who came there to speak. And under Russian missiles, we are able to produce more truth than in Russia, where there is no like military danger. So I was very happy to visit different panels, to meet you, to interview people, and definitely Valery Pekar. I also have a conversation with him on the channel, and I think that more of our English-speaking audience should learn about these like philosophers, intellectuals, writers who actually see the essence of Russia, but at the same time understand the fears of the West and can translate it and actually lead the way outside from this Moscow-centered frame. So there were a lot of good impressions. there might have been some imperfections, starting with this weather. Have you brought this weather to Ukraine? We have rainy,
I
cold May.
And we've got
It's
it here
not
now as
common.
well. I brought it back with me. No,
It's
ironically,
everywhere.
it was incredibly hot when I left, and so I'm not in any way to blame for the weather. Somebody
Hopefully,
else
you took
must
it
have.
away with you and in a couple of days. So it was really amazing, and I'm very grateful that all of these people come. They don't wait for the victory. They don't wait for a ceasefire. They don't wait until it is safe because now is the time to save our world, our future. And our does not mean just Ukrainian.
And of course, the organization, I mean, it's worth mentioning to people, the organization event itself was absolutely world class. Just extraordinary level of logistical skill required to put that on. As you say, the venue it was luxurious. I mean, it was the highest standard of conference
High
room,
tech.
of business center. In fact, it was built in a tech center. And quite honestly, I've seen lots of sort of business centers around in the West and in various countries. And, sometimes they're quite sort of glamorous and flash and steel and shiny. There was something sort of actually brilliantly designed about the whole complex. And it's clearly just the first couple of buildings out of what will be a very large tech park with a lot of humane spaces built in. And I have to say, it's probably one of the nicest and architected spaces I've seen, with the highest quality of finish and materials. You can see it in every kind of detail. So yes, to say it's comfortable, whatever is somehow actually to not actually express how extraordinary this space is. And remember, it's being built in wartime when Ukraine is under assault. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, because we plan to survive. We plan to live a good life and to share our experience so that never again.
We have to touch, of course. So lots and lots of absolutely positive and extraordinary sort of conversations with experts there. I mean, ones that really stood out, of course, there's Valery Pekar, but also Angelina Karyakiana, Katerina Zaremba, which people would have seen on the channel, but also fantastic conversations with Andrei Borovik and Yevgeny Khlibovitsky, who have not yet been published, and I think people will sort of look
Hmm.
forward to that. Also, the editor of, I think it's Euromaidan Press, Alia Chandra, decided that she was going to interview me. So people haven't seen that one yet. That's quite extraordinary. That will be published the next couple of days. But also, I'm going to have to throw this question at you. There were some examples, and we won't say, who is responsible, but there were some clear examples of what we could term West-splaining. Now, this is a phrase which I've just heard from you, but I instantly knew exactly what you meant by it. But if you can explain to the audience what you mean by it and what examples you saw.
Well, I try to be like once again super positive because important things are taking place, and even with if we disagree with some people, it's good that we have a possibility to show them their mistakes or wrong approach. And before we started filming this video, we have actually discussed a reaction among the Ukrainian intellectuals, which I fully support. And there was a Facebook post by Ostap Slovensky who actually discussed later an article that was shared later in Ukrainian media about like this scene Ukraine from the future. One of the panelists who was talking about her experience of war, um, tried to persuade Ukrainians that in 20, 30 years we will have a totally different understanding of the situation. It was Aida Cherkez, and she described the siege of Sarajevo, and that in 20, 30 years we may understand like Russians more. But there are a number of very distorted things. First of all, every war is different, and a lot of Ukrainians, especially those who try to tell the truth abroad, suffer from others thinking they know more or they know better. It's very wrong to equate wars. And there was a huge tragedy of the Second World War. And I may have people who tell me that, Anna, we know that our grandparents went through the history of the Second World War. But it's different. My grandparents also went through the history of the Second World War, but what we have now is another war after the Second World War. And it is very wrong to try and understand those hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers as victims while they keep killing Ukrainian children in beds at night. And Russian soldiers definitely have choice. And it's not a defensive war, no matter how Putin wants to describe it. That's aggressive imperial war. The defensive side you only see in Ukraine. And from this emotional, intellectual perspective, I think it is very wrong to even teach Ukrainians who go through this experience right now. It's not even a year or two after we have won this war. Plus, unfortunately, everything is undecided yet. Russian aggression grows. They have chosen, another thing we can discuss is these different scenarios that European intellectuals share online. And they say it can be a Georgian scenario or it can be a Belarus scenario. And I fully agree with Vitaly Portnikov, whom you also interviewed on that channel. And he says they are preparing Chechen scenario. Because in the first Chechen war, Chechen people won. Why did they lose second? Because they started pure terror, erasing villages, killing hundreds of thousands of Chechen civilians. And Chechnya is a small country, mountainous country. It was in the 90s. No, not that many internet, not that many information. No one literally paid much attention to that. What happened? And that was a massacre. That was thousands of war crimes. And with that terror, they destroyed people of Chechnya. They did not win. They did not like occupy it in a more or less civilized way, if it's possible to say so. They applied pure terror. They had these terrorist attacks non-stop until the moment comes when the majority of like brave people, resistant people are dead. Some manage to escape. And those who stay, they don't care anymore about anything. They are traumatized. All they want is like food and sleep. And that is what Russia prepares for Ukraine. If the world uh, gives up and just like observes, that's the plan. That is why they keep targeting Kyiv. They keep targeting every Ukrainian city while preparing ceasefire memorandum. It's so obvious. No, it's not Georgian. It's not Belarus scenario.
It's the Chechen scenario. And of course, Trump has come out and said Putin is acting like an insane person. He's acting crazy. And, the conversation that came out on the channel, that would be today, coming out today, but the day before, this interview goes out, we address this head on. Unfortunately, in the context of Russian strategy, the Chechen strategy, unfortunately, in the context of Russian history, unfortunately, in the context of Putin's education as a Chekist, as a thug on the streets of St. Petersburg, and then a Chekist, where being a pathological liar is sort of a prerequisite to fulfill such a role. He is not crazy at all. He is fitting in with a very well established pattern of behavior. Yes, it's pathological, but there's plenty of evidence of his predecessors behaving in this way. There's plenty of evidence of him behaving in this way over the 25 long years he has been the czar of some of the Russias.
This runs in the family, as you've said. Well, Trump's vocabulary is very limited. You know, English is not my native language. But when I listen to him, I desperately lack senses. There are too many elliptical constructions. I once had a trouble of translating his speech and felt like I'm missing something. And then I realized it's not me, it's Trump. So I think he kind of incorporated everything he could in that crazy word. And here I have like to both agree and disagree with you. Uh, this Russian attitude and this Putin's changed behavior, because, or at least like on public, because when he came to rule, he tried to describe himself as very pro-Western. He was talking about Crimea, of course, Ukrainian. No one wants to reshape any borders. Maybe one day Russia will join NATO. These were his words. But then returning back to this native Russian uh, attitude, he started acting as it may seem crazy for others. So we may speak about this national historical madness. It is definitely present, it is definitely pathological. It's not normal. And when Trump, even being totally tricked by Putin, keeps saying that we have these tremendous economic opportunities. It's going to be huge, lots of jobs for people. Putin does not care about jobs or the level of life of his people. And Russians do not vote for that. They vote for violence, expansion, and this fake image of Russian greatness that cannot be measured in real life, can only be measured in this like feverish consciousness that Dostoevsky discovered and described so well. So, uh, it's good, like that Trump said that Putin changed, he's crazy. I unfortunately think that tomorrow he will say that Putin changed his mind or I influenced him, and it may continue for some time. But what will not change is this Russian desire to destroy the West. Because once again, they talk about that openly now. And Putin repeats that, and it's obvious it's not just about Ukraine. Those trainings in Belarus, okay, but he right now, Putin, has 1 million army of violent, drunk, aggressive people who finally started earning some money by looting and killing others. He cannot return this million back to Russia.
The genie
He
is out
will
of the
keep
bottle,
them,
as they say.
yeah, he will keep them outside Russia forever. And either they are done, finished in Ukraine, or they continue. And they continue outside Ukraine too. That is obvious. What they do in the Baltic Sea, what they do with the elections. Half of the European and American problems are Russia backed, supported, exported. They work on that.
That's it. And we're got some episodes coming up which look at the scale of sabotage, assassination, involvement of Russia in threats, intimidation, and destruction of infrastructure. Indeed, there have been three fires in properties linked to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And there is a strong suspicion that those involved were co-opted, used, manipulated by Russian intelligence services to do that. And people may see these as just random acts of violence, but unfortunately, whenever Russia engages in these things, they also carry a message. They carry a message of threat. They carry a message directed at specific people who are perhaps, resisting Russia's power.
Yeah, do you remember that air crash of like the best people in Poland, the president, the representatives of the government? It was not accidental. They can do anything they want, and we kind people will try to find some explanations and some reasons and some, like, I don't know, even if it would be like 100% proved, I'm sure a lot of European leaders would look for that was a personal sabotage. That was not a national or something. That was just a crazy worker of an airport or something. No. Finally accepted that Russia is a crazy beast, not Putin, but Russia.
Rabid dog,
Millions of
MH17, another
Putin.
great example of that.
Yes. And there are so many. We can literally dedicate a 1 week stream just in this last decade.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? They say in propaganda, Goebbels' phrase was, the bigger the lie, the more believable it will be. If you tell little lies in a half apologetic way, they're not going to cut through. So the lie has to be massive, and you have to reiterate it and emphasize it and never deviate from the lie. And that is clearly what we see Russian propagandists do. But we also see them committing crimes that are so huge and so monstrous and in plain sight. And yet we're almost terrified to, point the finger and say, you did this, and there's the evidence. There's the apartment bombings in Moscow that consolidated Putin's power, an act sort of so horrific, blowing up hundreds of people in their beds, simply to consolidate political power. There is plenty of evidence now that was absolutely orchestrated by the intelligence services, almost certainly to benefit him or even on his orders. But these crimes are so monstrous and so huge that our brains have trouble really acknowledging them. You mentioned the plane there. Also, Mariupol, a crime so horrific and so huge and on such a vast scale that it is comparable to any of the worst crimes committed by the Nazis in the run up to and during the Second World War. They're comparable to any genocides that took place in Yugoslavia and other places. This is a monstrous crime on a historic scale, and yet our brains really struggle to acknowledge that.
Unfortunately, these are like biblical crimes. And starting from Mariupol, totally destroyed city with graves made in the yards on the playgrounds when members of the family had to bury their closest. People were what they do, for example, just before recording this video, I was reading about a new drone hunt in Kherson. Just think about that. What kind of people do that? It's not Putin. They hunt like women, they hunt buses. At this time, these were like city workers repairing something. 6 injured because some crazy Russians sitting far away targeted them like in a video game with a drone. Do you really want to negotiate with this kind of people and let them repeat them elsewhere? Uh, it
And were
is
they just doing a
something,
job? Were they just doing a job because someone ordered them
not job.
to? No, it's more than a
Yeah,
job.
there
You've
are
read
not
some of
so
the
many
Telegram
people.
stuff, you know.
Come on. First of all, it's not the job to hunt people. It's not the job to do that with drone, clearly seeing what you're doing. Russians have, it's weird to say that there are some rules of war, but there are. And one of the reasons I think why this ban on the usage of long-range missiles was lifted is because 3 years of the full-scale war, with all the evil that Russia did to us, and let's be honest, Ukrainians have a right now to hate Russians. What I like about people who want to preserve like tolerance, democracy, for example, Vlad Vexler on his channel, he says like, I understand you as a Ukrainian have a right because that they do it basically every day. Apart from like they kill children, they burn hospitals. But even if we forget about that, there are these sleepless nights. There are lots of people who have problems with their heart, with their pressure, pregnant women. It's constant stress that they give to all of the country. So they kill 100, but they also shorten life, cause lots of health issues, psychological issues in hundreds of thousands, in millions. And it is with all that they do to us, we still keep targeting only legitimate military objects inside Russia. And I think it's a part of our like DNA too, that we want to remain humans. We are, after all that they do, still from this human, spiritual, psychological perspective, less traumatized than them. Because imagine what kind of misery, unhappiness, hatred you have to go through to hunt people with drone in Kherson.
And they're not doing it with cold detachment. I listened to many interviews of, let's say, Second World War soldiers from Britain, and almost all of them will say, actually, especially if they're those who are just in the trenches or in lower positions down, they will all say this is a job. It's a filthy, dirty, cruel, horrific job, but we had to do it to survive. And almost all of them will preface whatever they're saying with that. We had no option. It's not what we would have chosen to done, and we took no pleasure in it. And I think most of those people who are saying these things genuinely feel that, and they came back with mental traumas and so on. I know that because members of my own family, you know, um, uh, fought in various parts of the Second World War, and that then affects them throughout their life. It affects the human relationships they have. They may not like going out in public places. They may not be vivacious, and people will know that from their own family histories. We're seeing something different here. I mentioned, the idea that Russians are doing a job. Yes, they've been told to do certain things, but they haven't been told to do it, as you say, with this flair for cruelty, this extreme trauma that's been inflicted. They don't have to take pleasure, but when you look at some of the Instagram accounts of Z Patriots and so on, and some of the stuff shared, it's quite clearly that this isn't just a small minority. There are a significant number of people who are getting some kind of thrill, some kind of pleasure from inflicting this cruelty, violence, humiliation on others.
Because they have this totally unrealistic concept of Russian greatness. They cannot connect it to anything that surrounds them in their cities and villages. They don't have Russia-produced computers. They don't have Russia-produced mobile phones. They don't have Russian artificial intelligence. They need it for their operations, informational, but they don't have an analog.
I was about to say something horrible
They
about
are
natural
not.
intelligence there, but that would have sounded slightly
Yeah,
racist as well.
agree. They don't have a lot of students coming to study in their universities. They only try to invite those from the countries which resources they destroy, like in Africa or some Asian countries. You don't see hordes of tourists visiting Russia. Their banking system is not the one where you want to put your money or, I don't know, change your money into rubles. They don't have the best healthcare. I don't know people traveling from France to get an operation in Russia. They don't have like, even if you want like modern culture and so on, they don't have like writers who are super popular globally since the 19th century. Nothing. All you're talking about Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. I'm sorry. That's the previous century, the century before century. So they are not competitive at all, but they still keep repeating this cult-like style that Russia is great. And they want to see themselves like above the rest. And they can only do it by putting others down. So they start beating you, like, of course, like, who is stronger, a successful IT businessman or a criminal that is right now stabbing him with a knife. At that particular moment, that criminal, because he can take the life of that person. But in the big world, he is the loser that will end up in prison. And that's how Russia, that's this very brief moment when they think they experience greatness, when it's not greatness. You do not become great because you stand on someone's head. You remain the same. And unfortunately, this nobody is working with this myths of Russian greatness, because apart from the task to defeat and demilitarize them, we need to do serious work with the population, something that was done to the Germans. Not all of them were involved in Nazi crimes. Many of them did not know, but it was the general policy of the Allies to introduce them to what was happening because they were silent or because they did not stop it. And it worked really well. And now we have one of the strongest democratic, diverse countries in the world, Germany, that teaches us what respect to human life and diversity is. And I don't see any similar plans getting ready for Russia. There were a lot of bad empires. They all collapsed. They all collapsed in the 19th, 20s, by mid 20th century. And somehow they managed to become successful. Uh, have a look like at Poland. Um, I don't remember. It seems to me that Gedroit's quote, who said that Poland will become successful when it forgets its imperial past. And Poland did. And it became one of the most successful, vibrant, dynamic democracies. It's the country many people want to live in. And I'm not talking about Ukrainian refugees only. I'm talking about Germans, Brits who come and find their place in that very comfortable environment.
And Britain in the
And
90s, I think, moved beyond that. In the 90s, and the high point maybe when we hosted the Olympics, we had
Mhm.
possibly started to really move out of that, the imperial dream, the imperial nostalgia. Unfortunately, to my mind, Brexit is something that drags us back into that. It's irrational. It it is a backward-looking rather than a forward-looking philosophy, if we can even call it a philosophy. It is based on feelings and not rationality, and a part of it looks to a lost imperial legacy and tries to recapture that greatness, and in the process destroys all that is good, all that is forward-looking and progressive.
But now we observe a lot of good things happening between the European Union and Britain. And some really tremendous changes may be, like led or brought to us by this great Russian evil. I still believe we will win. And by we, I don't mean just Ukraine. I mean all the nations that, from the Russian perspective, are weak because they respect human life and know what dignity is. They consider that a weakness. So I believe our weakness will bring us victory. And maybe a lot of those minor things or things that are the result of various disinformation campaigns or even dirty Russian money doing the job will disappear, will be slushed. Because it's just like with in the moment of tremendous danger, many people become stronger and make clever decisions, like the adrenaline. And this may happen to our countries too. And what we observe right now is this great cooperation between Britain and the European Union. And I hope that Ukraine is finally not seen as a burden, but as an asset. It's not the trouble that we cause to the world. We actually give the world more time to prepare for a greater trouble.
And I want to dig into that phrase dignity because I've been fascinated by Maidan, and I unfortunately never came to Ukraine at that point, never saw the Maidan unfolding. I only watched it on television screens, and I have to admit at the time I knew that it was extraordinary series of events, but I didn't really have any sense of its historical significance. But more recently, I've become fascinated by that idea of dignity and what it actually means, because superficially, it seems to be fairly clear. It's not living under autocracy. It's being able to exercise your agency as a human and look forward to sort of progress and a better material life. But it seems to me encapsulated in that idea of the revolution of dignity. There is so much more there. And actually, there is so much that actually Western democracies could really benefit from if they understood that concept of dignity better.
I think because we live too close to Russia, we are under this constant threat of the aggression. We know what life under the Kremlin is. We are stronger in protecting our boundaries. And here I don't mean just physical boundaries, but these that make us humans. Lots of generations of Russians are somehow broken, and they constantly accept circumstances. And in Ukraine, it has never been like that. Actually, decisions were made on Maidan since the times of Kiev Rus. Cossacks brought it to the peak. So, something that surprises many around the world was very natural for Ukrainians. And it's not something that appeared in 2000s and can disappear if you destroy a certain number of activists, what Putin believes. It's a quality, it's a part of our national character. In the book I'm working on, I actually speak about this like important concepts for Ukraine, and I was asking my colleagues, my friends, what would you tell me about? And all of them were saying about freedom and dignity. It kept repeating like freedom, dignity, freedom, dignity. And that is what constantly breaks Russian plans. That is what constantly breaks the plans of those who want to sacrifice Ukraine, to appease Ukraine. Because you can do it. You cannot do it because people keep standing. And it's not only because we're so brave, well trained, or we don't want to be a part of Russia. It's also some kind of unexplainable thing when you don't want a life like that. You don't want a life like it was in the Soviet Union. I believe that if you heard like there were these gulag labor camps, they were destroyed by the protests, by the how do you say it? What would be the good word? Like if you do it in the prison, in the labor camp, uh, mainly of Ukrainians. There are history books that analyze this movements that were organized by Ukrainians in Gulag. And you may come across Russian historians saying we shouldn't have bring Ukrainians together with all of them because they ruined the system. Uh, we keep ruining the system of repressions by demonstrating that even in this part of the world, in the Eastern Europe that was sacrificed to the Kremlin, you can preserve human dignity and the need for freedom. And like in the worst case scenario, if they don't kill off Ukraine, all of the Ukrainians, and they occupy Ukraine, in 50 years, in 100 years, in 10 years, that will destroy the Russian Federation, the Russian Empire. Maybe that is our mission in the world.
Yes, and a very valuable mission it would be too. Although Ukrainians have preserved themselves and their culture in the first instance. They're not responsible for, transforming the Russian Imperium. But yes, if that's a side project, that would be fantastic. And of course, we see this.
Mhm.
There's certain people watching the channel are not going to appreciate this, but what we see in Trump's behavior towards allies, what we see in Trump's behavior towards Zelensky is a very clear effort not just to manipulate and control, but he seeks to strip people away from their dignity. You can see this is one of the main tools in his arsenal. And People may say that Zelensky adopted, an undiplomatic response, that he was emotional and that it was strategic disaster in the Oval Office. But what you saw there was his Ukrainian sense of dignity being inflamed. And that is not something I think he's prepared to surrender. That strikes me, despite all the criticism from some quarters, as actually something we must learn from, which is no matter what coercion and pressure are placed on you, you should not allow yourselves to be stripped of your dignity.
And remember, he was also to return back to Ukrainians who were watching him. So not just about his personal dignity, but about our national dignity. And he lives in a country of people who stand for that. So he clearly understands it's not the term of elections, but this attitude that he demonstrates. And I think that's a good example to follow for many world leaders, because even if you want to please Trump, remembering that Trump is very temporary in the history of the world. But even if you want to please him, you may see he loves very, very strong people who actually put him in complex situations. And by worshiping him, you lose, just like Musk disappeared. So I think that, like, there are some basic things, like your personal dignity, respect, and losing them, you lose everything. And no mission in the world, no normal mission in the world can demand you to lose your dignity, self-respect, and freedom. You may lose comfort, you may be silent sometimes, you may give floor to the others, but no one normal and nothing normal, nothing healthy will ever demand you to lose that dignity. That's why we have to protect it. And we don't have to expect something good coming from those who act in a way like Trump does, Putin does, or others, or Orban.
And I think Ukrainians decided some time ago, well, many decades ago, that they fundamentally have to do things for themselves. But in the context of the war, I think it was in 2023, and looking at the inconsistent support from the US and allies and the slow provision of what was required for victory. In fact, the non-provision of what's required for victory, only what's required for survival. I think Ukrainians really, took the decision as a government, as a people, that they needed to ensure that they could carry on fighting themselves, in the absence of, let's say, sort of the kind of support they required from allies. Now we get something, worse coming from Trump. But it seems that Ukrainians are already mentally and physically prepared, for not just betrayals, but for the requirement to really, really fight and carry on. And we see this week in the most horrific and largest scale air attacks that have happened against Kyiv and many other cities as well. There seems to be a determination to fight, and understanding that actually, if Ukrainians aren't going to fight for themselves, nobody else is going to do that job for them.
Yeah, we know that, but we also know that the danger is greater than just the Ukrainian territories. We have to be realistic. We cannot expect anything serious coming from people who change their opinions or who keep saying positive things about Putin, who is definitely a world war criminal. So I think a part of Ukrainian diplomacy is to, like follow the rules, demonstrate the respect, but at the same time get more time to prepare ourselves. And I have a lot of trust in our European allies. Once again, not just because they support Ukraine, thank you for that, but also because they understand that it is already a European war. And my friend, who's now working in Germany on a business trip, she sent me a photo that there are posters with quotes from Bild, saying that Trump left Europe with during war, abandoned Europe. And it was one of the first times when I actually read not Ukraine war, but Europe war. Because what Putin does, he fights actually with the United States too. And all this chaos produced by Trump is the result of Putin's investment in the strategy. be it with money, special services, or something else.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Anna, we're going to have to probably sort of end it there. I know you've got lots of stuff to do. I've got to dive into the subtitling of the video that's going out today, which is quite intense and challenging, actually. Wonderful to speak again, and I know the audience is going to get lots of value from this. And of course, we'll pick up from where we left off next time.
Thank you so much for this amazing, and I don't know, it's not a channel, it's way more. This book, this community, and you create amazing meanings, senses, and strategies that have a great potential to make us stronger together. These are challenging times, but with all your supporters, with all your skills, I feel safer as a Ukrainian. Thank you.
And thank you for everything you're doing and your incredible community as well, and to all other Ukrainians who are fighting in every sphere to push back the darkness that emanates from your neighboring lands. Anna, thank you.
Дякую.
Дякую дуже. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!